we have on four individuals, all of whom are Puerto Rican and are scientists and are actively involved in galvanizing the scientific community to see what they can do for the island in the midst of this pandemic. So if each of you would introduce yourselves and tell us where you work.
Sure, I can start. I'm Dr. Kenira Thompson, and I'm the president of the Ponce Research Institute and the vice president of research at Ponce Health Sciences University in Ponce, Puerto Rico.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Giovanna Guerrero-Medina. I'm the executive director of Ciencia, Puerto Rico, a nonprofit meant to give voice and purpose to a large community of Puerto Rican scientists in Puerto Rico and across the world. And I also have a position at the Yale School of Medicine.
Hello, my name is Marcos Lopez. I'm Research Program Manager at the Puerto Rico Public Health Trust of the Puerto Rico Science, Technology, and Research Trust. I'm also Assistant Professor at the University of Puerto Rico in Humacao, and I'm part of the staff of Ciencia Puerto Rico for a long time now.
Okay.
My name is Daniel Colón-Ramos. I am a professor at the Yale School of Medicine. I also have an adjunct position at the University of Puerto Rico. I'm a neuroscientist. My main job is to do research. I am a founding member of Ciencia Puerto Rico, and I am a trustee of the Puerto Rico Science and Technology Trust.
Okay. Danielle, let's start with you. What do you want people to know about what the scientists are trying to accomplish?
David, scientists are trained when we see a problem, we find a solution. And this is a problem, and we're looking for solutions. So there are barriers to those solutions. None of our discoveries ever start with a solution. They start with problems, all of them. But, the scientist is the person that can point at the moon and say, we can get there. So we're not going to stop until we get there. And in this case, there is a pandemic, a global pandemic that is affecting everybody. And our statement is simple. Puerto Rico has the scientists, the equipment, the brains to be able to solve this pandemic. We don't need to wait for other people to come and solve it for us. Actually, the longer we wait, the more vulnerable will leave the population. Scientists should be working with doctors and should be working with the government, united, to find a solution to this, and we shouldn't be sitting in our hands waiting for the solution to come from elsewhere.
So adding to what you're talking about, Danielle, of what should be doing, Giovanna and everyone who's a part of this, let's, if we can, stick to what should be done, because my hope in taking time from all of you, which I'm grateful for, is to commit those who watch this or hear about it to taking some of these ideas and implementing them. So Giovanna, what needs to be done?
Well, from the very beginning, the WHO and other world health organizations have been very clear that in order to beat this pandemic, you need tests. You need to know where the virus is among a population, and you need to be able to isolate the people that it's affecting, and you need that's the way to stop it. And so from the very beginning, actually this group of people right here started communicating because we knew that in Puerto Rico there weren't many diagnostic tests being done for COVID-19. And we knew that in order to beat the pandemic, we were going to have to ramp up the capacity, the local capacity in Puerto Rico to do these tests. And so I lead this organization that has members across the U.S. and, in fact, the world, at different universities that have access to equipment, reagents, that have connections with companies. And that was the problem. How can we get more tests in Puerto Rico? And the solution was, let's reach out to our network. And through connections like here at Yale University, through Daniel, through connections that Marcos had with scientists all over the world, we were able to bring to Puerto Rico reagents that allowed some labs to actually start doing double the number of tests that were originally being done in Puerto Rico, and to get access to materials that are essential in order to collect samples for the agencies to start counting how many cases there are of COVID in Puerto Rico.
Kenira, are you an example of one of those labs who has benefited from this mindfulness, if you will?
Yes, so we're very thankful for the support from this awesome team. We've been meeting weekly for over a month now, and multiple times a week. And I think, like Danielle mentioned, this is about us as scientists. We're trained to collaborate, we're trained to share expertise, and we're trained to join efforts to answer questions and to decipher problems. And that's what we've been trying to do. And I think, when it comes down to it, that's what has to happen in order for us to be able to beat COVID in Puerto Rico. I think we need to stop thinking of this as individual silos. I think this is not an issue of a public sector versus private sector. I think that we really need to come at it from a different angle and try to join efforts to address all of the issues and obstacles that we're facing as an island. And I think that a lot of effort has been put in that direction, and I know a lot of leeway has been made, but I still think that there could be more collaboration going on between the private and the public sector to actually, move things along and get this going in the right direction.
Okay, but Marcos, I'm still looking for you guys to tell me what needs to be done. Like, I'm not hearing, like, what should they start doing today? Are there different phone calls that need to be made? Do different people need to be involved? Like, every time I talk to the Secretary of Health, I want to sort of bang my head against the table because he agrees with what you guys are saying. We need more testing. But I talked to him yesterday and he said, well, we simply can't get the reagents. And I said, is this a discrimination thing? Like, what the heck is going on?
So,
I'm sorry.
This is Kenira. I just wanted to say real quick because I think one of the issues is that we are looking at this as individual silos. So Department of Health is looking for their reagents. The government is looking for their reagents. Every private lab on the island is looking for their own reagents as silos. I think if we joined efforts and all came together and had a critical mass of people coming together with the support of the government and saying to these companies, listen, we have all of these potential samples. We have all of these dollars that can be spent on providing reagents to the island of Puerto Rico as a whole rather than piecemealing it. I think that would be more of an impactful way to do this than to just continue doing it like we have been.
Aha. Okay. All right. I get that. Marcos?
Yeah. I think that what is happening is that, the responsible entity to manage the pandemic is the Department of Health. Okay. So they need to take the lead on managing everything. However, one of the big problems is that they cannot do it alone. Okay. They need the private clinical labs because they don't have the infrastructure to do testing. Okay. They need to, get along with the hospitals because they don't have any enough hospitals to put in people when this starts, filling up with ill people in there. So we need to try to communicate much better. They need a lot of help. Okay, their capacity to do testing is only 50 to 100 tests per day. The Veterans Hospital is doing even more testing by sending samples to the U.S. in the beginning than the Department of Health. And now, Laboratorio Toledo in Arecibo is taking over the whole operation. Okay, and in Ponce is an example. Ponce, they started, they wanted to help. Okay, they still don't have complete, all the capacity to do a lot of testing. Okay, but they joined Toledo and they are doing a lot of testing. They already sent about more than 600 samples already. Okay, those are the types of collaborations that we need because every time we try to keep it silos, okay, a lot of people is gonna suffer and die.
Danielle, what's the reality? What is the, go ahead, Danielle.
No, I just wanted to mention two things. Like, I think Kenira was very humble in her explanation of the team. I'm going to give you one success story that exemplifies the team aspect that Kenira was mentioning, something that this type of consortiums of scientists recently solved. And I presented as a concept of the importance of working together, but also what is not getting done. So when these labs come together, the clinical labs have a certain expertise. These high-end clinical labs that run hundreds or have the potential of running hundreds, thousands of examples, they have an expertise. And there is a reality that for certain tests, not all of them, there are certain reagents, not all of them, that are missing. But if you look at it granularly, you can sit on your hands and be like, oh, well, let's then wait until the world goes through the pandemic, and then we'll get our reagents when we get our reagents. That's not what scientists do. You know what scientists do, like Kenira, who's sitting right here, she sat down and she said, okay, what are we missing? And the other labs were like, oh, we're missing a pink liquid that needs to be used to stabilize the virus. Without that, we cannot do our test. And Kenira's team went and hacked that liquid. They figure out how you make it, what are the reagents that you need to make. Now, the other labs have the capacity to run thousands of samples. Kenira's lab has the capacity to figure out what is needed to run those samples because they can get, it's the difference between like when you have a race car, you have the driver and you have the mechanic. The scientists are like kind of the engineers, the mechanics. We can get under the hood of the car, we can fix the car. We also need the drivers, which are the big clinical labs. But if you have the driver sitting around the car being like, well, this car is not starting, and you have the scientists elsewhere, like screaming from the other side, being like, oh, you need to open the hood. No, you need to get them together. And I think that's what the Department of Health has been missing. And maybe with this secretary it will change. We have to remember the Department of Health has changed secretaries 3 times in the last 5 weeks. So 2 secretaries ago, like the answers that you're getting from this secretary are not the same ones that we were getting from the secretary 4 or 6 weeks ago. And I understand they're different people, but I'm very hopeful as a scientist and as a Puerto Rican that this secretary is actually now shifting the dial, and he will actually bring people together to potentiate the deployment of tests by finding these reagents, by generating them, by hacking them, by finding solutions to this crisis.
But I don't know how much time we have to continue bringing people together. You know, I go back to the restlessness that was felt after Hurricane Maria, where waiting a day or 2 or 3 means 10, a dozen, or 100 more infections. You know, the health department put out a notice today saying a man in his 40s died who was positive of the virus, and they said nothing else was known about it. Well, nothing else was known about it is an unacceptable example of a poor lack of contact tracing. Mm-hmm. So, Giovanna, again, if the secretary were to watch this, the governor were to hear about it, does the private sector need to become more involved? What needs to happen? My concern is that 2 months down the road, we're going to be talking about the same thing.
Yeah. So the private sector actually is involved. So we're all part of a group that meets twice a week with private laboratories that have the big robots that could run thousands of samples a day in Puerto Rico, not sending them out to somewhere else to wait a week for results. And they want to help. They want to put those labs to work. But as Kenira mentioned, in order for that to happen, we need to have a unified voice. So I also have a certain sense of urgency, and yeah, I also get frustrated. I think the government needs to really commit to solving this problem together as a nation with all the different sectors. And we've heard a lot about rapid tests in Puerto Rico, and I think people are thinking that's going to be the solution. Our message is, that's fine. The rapid tests can have a use. They can have a function to gauge the immunity of a population, but they're not going to be a key tool that you need in order to beat this pandemic. You need to be able to diagnose. And so we would like to work with the government all together in figuring out how we can get more molecular PCR-based tests done in Puerto Rico.
Okay, so Kenira, you've had a meeting with the governor, you've met with the task force, you have this unique position of being a scientist advisor, but also a frontline worker actually doing the stuff and making it happen. What more needs to be done? What's the next step?
So in our lab, we've been developing in-house tests that we should be launching next week. So we should be able by next week to be running PCR tests in our facility in Ponce. However, we are still working with the companies in the U.S. Like when we talked last time, we still have missing reagents that we've not received. We received a whole bunch of what we needed, but we're still lacking some of those items. So once again, I think if we join forces with the government and stop thinking of this as a public versus private sector type of pandemic, I think that having those conversations. I know the governor and the Department of Health has been meeting with some of the local labs, particularly the Toledo lab, because they are the ones who are have been able to expand capacity. But I think, like Giovanna mentioned, there's a bunch of other labs on the island that could expand that capacity further. And I think that we cannot ignore that fact. Whatever can be done. And once again, as silos, it is very difficult. My lab placing orders to a company, it doesn't really impact the company because they're getting multi-million-dollar orders from New York and Washington and every other state. However, if we join efforts as an island and we place these orders as a group and we pressure these large companies as a team, then I think not only will all of our resources be able to be pulled together to make it more significant to the companies and make them, pay attention, But I think that in terms of getting the resources to us, it'll certainly be more expeditious. So that would be my petition, for us to not continue thinking of this as the Department of Health working in silo with their lab in San Juan, and occasionally, talking to some of the private labs. I think that we need to stop thinking of it as a private versus public type of scenario and start joining efforts and think of us, the private labs, as complementary sites that can be there to support the capacity and expand the capacity of the Department of Health. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. We're there to expand capacity and hopefully help Puerto Ricans.
All right, so I had an aha moment listening to you, right? Because Puerto Rico is near dead last when it comes to testing. Other states are arguably a much bigger priority given population, given numbers, whatever. But you have everybody in Puerto Rico operating differently, and I get you. Like what you just said makes complete sense. So Danielle, who do we need to go to get them to say, okay, we're going to make a request from Roche, but it's going to be one request, and it's going to service Toledo and Kenira and the other labs on the island?
I believe it's the Department of Health. I think that's their role. It's their leadership role. So if they can convene these different labs. So right now the Department of Health is doing their test, and the status right now is that all of these labs are competing for reagents. So there's a priority from the company side. If you talk to the companies, they're like, we have a priority list. We first have to give to the Department of Health. Then we have to give to the dengue branch in the CDC. Then we have to give to this university and that other place because they're our biggest clients. So that's how they see it as a company. We need to go there and say, look, based on our population, we need this many tests. We're dead last right now, or next to last, as compared to all other states and territories in terms of testing. Puerto Rico is doing its part. The people of Puerto Rico are doing their part. They're staying home. There was social isolation that started early. That's how they're holding back the virus. But that is insufficient. You also need contact tracing. You need data. You need science. You need tests.
And Marcos, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm on the same line. We need to start beefing up, the testing, because otherwise, we will not be able to establish projections and we will not be able to see how we are doing. Okay. And people, they'll start getting desperate. Okay. This morning we had a Zoom symposium, and we were saying just the same thing. Okay. People are starting getting desperate. People are, they know a lot about the epidemiologics because there was a lack of information coming from the health department. Okay. They know that we need to flatten the curve. They know that we need to do a lot of things, but at the end, in order to beef up that curve, you need to do more testing. If we don't, if we don't get along and if we don't work as an island, as one person, and talk to these companies and try to look for solutions, it's not going to happen. Do you know that there's a company that had approved one of the EUAs, PerkinElmer, and they just told me that they're going to start, giving up the extraction kits and the PCR kits to the CDC, to the state department labs that they have the capacity to run their kits, and they're going to be for free. Okay. But in here, we haven't seen, any action in order to try to get the infrastructure, at least in the Department of Health. I mean, if they want to do it themselves, that's fine. But, we don't see that is actually happening. Okay,
emergency use authorization.
Okay.
So it's the FDA allows during emergency situations for companies to develop tests that have not gone through the entire FDA approval process, and they submit with some documentation the emergency use authorization, the EUA, and once that is submitted and there is acknowledgement from the agency, then the companies can begin to provide those tests to be used for for a diagnostic capacity. I would like to just mention that I can't speak for the other private labs certainly, but I can speak for my own. And I think one petition that I think there's a federal mandate to establish priorities for disbursement of reagents and any COVID-related materials and supplies. And I think that by joining efforts with our local Department of Health, and by them establishing that the private sector, the private labs on the island are actually complementary to the local Department of Health, then the priority for us to get our items would automatically be bumped up. So I think that is, right off the bat, one way in which we could support each other. we are here to expand capacity, and I think that once again, it's the only way that this will happen. Otherwise, we will continue to work as independent entities, and at the end of the day, it's not going to be what we need to do in order to be useful for the Puerto Rican community that needs so much testing in order to be able to beat this virus.
David, I'd like to make 2 points, if I may. Number one is that I think the call needs to be made. We need molecular tests, not, serological tests, the ones that they already purchase, fine, but we don't need to invest more money in those. What we do, if we buy anything, we need to buy the equipment that Marcos mentioned, the capacity to do those molecular tests in Puerto Rico. So that's an important message that needs to be heard. And then I will just say, I'm the executive director of an organization that has over 13,000 members. Most of them are scientists. They cover all disciplines under the sun. They're doing amazing things in Puerto Rico, beyond. And so I know how much capacity, what a human resource we have among the Puerto Rican scientific community. And it's always been our message that we don't have to look elsewhere for solutions, or we can collaborate with other places for solutions, but we have a lot of the solution right here at our access. And so I think, that should be the message that we hope that the Department of Health hears, is that they have at their disposal an amazing resource in the Puerto Rican scientific community, and we are interested in working together.
Okay, so I don't do a science blog. I'm not a science reporter. So this is not to just sort of give a space for us all to say things and feel comfortable. My intention is to get crap done. I want to make a difference, and that's what every one of you wants. That's what y'all want. So lastly, I want to ask each of you the same question. What can you commit to doing now, whether it involves calling? I will give you the Secretary of Health's cell phone number. I will give it to you, and he will not be offended. Will you call him? Will you, Kenira, can you go knock on the door in San Juan? Like, what do we need? Because this makes sense, and everybody who's going to watch this it's going to make sense. What can you do?
Yes, I'm happy to call him, and I'm happy to call him. I'm happy to share, our plans with him, and happy to talk about our ideas to make this work. I'm more than happy to do that with him or any other member of the Department of Health or the task force in Fortaleza. Very happy to, we're here just to collaborate and support them.
Okay.
And I'm happy to rally the Puerto Rican scientific community to write letters to support the petitions of Puerto Rico, to help put together applications for Puerto Rico to be able to approve its own tests. That's something that the F is allowing jurisdictions to do, and it's something that could empower Puerto Rico to be able to take control of their own testing situation. So that's my commitment.
I commit, if the Secretary of Health needs help, I commit to using every contact that I have. I have 20 years of working in the top institutions in the U.S. I've made a lot of contacts with people that are in scientific boards in all of these companies. If he wants to get behind asking some of these reagents from any of these companies, I'll put every single one of my contacts and my time at his disposal. I'm happy to brainstorm about how to integrate science at every level of the decision making, from what tests should be made to how to get the test going, to who are the people like through Giovanna's network that need to be, who are the stakeholders, to how to do the contact tracing. Another thing that we didn't talk about is contact tracing, and how Kenira has initiated a program that's online to try to keep contact tracing. But all of these efforts, David, if they're ad hoc and separate, which is what they are right now, they're starting to congeal, but if they're ad hoc and separate, they're very weak. This is like, it's like you have a war, and there's a difference between having a bunch of disorganized soldiers and having an army. There's two different things. He's the general. He needs to convince people, and I put my time and all of the resources that I have in terms of knowledge and contacts at his disposal.
Gotcha. Marcos, final word.
Yeah, as my other fellows here said, I'm willing to put my contacts, all my efforts, my time, and all the resources that we have in Ciencia Puerto Rico, and also the Puerto Rico Public Health Trust, to help the Department of Health in Puerto Rico to increase testing, to help with the epidemiologic projections. In any capacity that we could help, we're going to be there. Now there's going to be a big opportunity for using convalescent plasma in order to start treating patients, okay, that are going to be in the ICUs, okay, with convalescent plasma. That's something that we need to move and start working on. We need to move it along with the testing because we're going to be in a critical stage of the pandemic, okay, and we need to start thinking ahead this thing happens.
All right, good. You can hear the dog whining behind me. He's not being starved. His walker is here, and she knocked on the door, and so I got to go. But
Okay.
I'm going to publish this. I'm going to publish all of it, and I'm actually going to do it one better. I'm going to send this link to the secretary and ask him to watch it. Fair?
Perfect. Thank
Yeah,
you.
excellent.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
David.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye.